When people start talking about channels, they can get into like a list of like 100 things, but really it comes down to you have inbound and you have outbound, and what goes in those buckets and how you use those are obviously changing a little bit. You have what I call ecosystem, which is using third parties or other people or companies to grow, which is a huge bucket. And then you have virality or word of mouth of your product. And you have events, which is not mutually exclusive, but basically doing things. So if there's those buckets, then I say, before you can choose those buckets, I tell people they have to evaluate what their marketing advantages are. So this is back to the strengths thing. You have to figure out like what is unique about your company. And I have like a list of what those things can be, but that can be something like to the thing we were just talking about, like your founder has some like crazy, interesting story and industry experience that nobody else has.
Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Tarin, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product growth and senior leadership topics. Welcome to the Product Tea. Today's guest is the B2B marketing guru who's turned frameworks into Kramerworks and her career into a masterclass in startup growth. She's been the first marketer at not one, not two, but 4 companies, including Asana, Carta, and Astra, which is now part of Slack. Along the way, she's helped startups scale from scrappy teams of 10 to bustling companies of 300 and beyond. And now she's sharing her hard-earned wisdom through the MKT1 newsletter, a go-to guide for startup marketing leaders, and the MKT1 Capital, where she's invested into over 50 companies. And because that's not enough, and she's now bored, she's now coming to the Product Tea to talk about stuff with me. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Product Tea. Emily Kramer, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I'm getting over being sick, so I got a little bit funky of a voice, but other than that, I'm doing good.
How would you rate this introduction from 1 to full-time CMO?
It was good. It had some good adjectives in there. I liked she's turned marketing frameworks into Kramerworks. I do jokingly, but not jokingly, sometimes call them Kramerworks, so I liked that. It was good.
Oh, you do? Oh, that's good.
Oh, yeah. You didn't know that I called them Kramerworks?
What a coincidence.
You did know.
I did not. What a coincidence. Okay, we're just going to move on now because I look really good now.
Okay, yeah. Good research or not.
Very good.
Yeah.
So, Emily, is there anything that I forgot in this introduction that you want to add to this?
No, I don't know if you mentioned that I advise startups as well. So I advise heads of marketing at usually growth stage startups, and I'm focused on my newsletter, and I'm launching a podcast myself very soon called Dear Marketers. And so, yeah.
Oh, it's called Dear Marketers. Am I like, do I need to get an MBA in marketing or something like first before I can appear there? Or is that, no, never mind. Yeah. We're not doing that.
It's actually not interview style. It's like I have a set of co-hosts, friends of mine. And so it's like eavesdropping on our conversations kind of. So no guests, because I didn't want anyone to feel left out, So I just said, no, we're not doing it.
Okay, good. I'm not going to be part of that. But
no, you're not.
Let me ask you the question that I ask everyone, especially the marketers. What do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
Yeah, I think people think that I'm organized and I'm not. Like, I think even people that get to know me, like, think I have it together and I'm organized. I think similarly, maybe this is better. I was texting with a friend recently and said something about being lazy. And she was like, you're like, I would never use the word lazy to describe you. And this is a friend of like 15 years. And I was like, what are you talking about? I am so lazy. So whether it be like, I like to get out and do things, but I also like love a good sit. I like to like sit around and watch TV. I like to not get up until like late hours in the morning. Like I'm a pretty lazy human. I'm not like getting up at 5 and like getting going by any means. So I think once you get to know me, you realize that I'm not a morning person, but I think I would describe myself as really lazy, but I think most people would not. So I'm lazy and disorganized and all of those things.
So wasn't it my former boss, Bill Gates, who said that you need to be like lazy people are the ones that you're looking out for? I'm not sure now, but like, because those are investing a lot of time into streamlining their work, like and optimizing processes and stuff.
I've always been like hyper efficient at getting things done. Like my friends from college are always like, Emily didn't do any work. And I'm like, that's so not true. I just didn't sit in the library and like socialize and take forever. I like got it done. And then I went and did my thing. So
yeah, because you look forward to not doing the thing, so you're going to get it done fast. And also you are known for all your really good templates, and the marketers love their templates apparently.
Yeah, I like efficiency a lot. So
Yeah, so I think you need to know chaos in order to know how to organize it, because otherwise you don't know for what you're actually creating it. But like, we're not going to go and talk about your templates too much. Maybe, I mean, you can maybe seed them also like into this
Sure.
conversation. So
Yeah.
we're going to talk about something absolutely not clickbaiting: the death of all go-to-market channels in 2025. Bam, it's done. Marketing is dead. What do you have to say about that?
I don't think that marketing is dead.
What?
Yeah, I know, really. I think marketing is changing. It always has. It's nothing new. Marketing has evolved a lot. Like, look at how people did marketing even 10, 20 years ago. It's different. I think that the death of channels might be a little more accurate. I think a lot of the channels that were go tos and sort of no brainers, be it search or even over the last few years outbound, are, I think that's changing, and they'll be part of what you do, but they won't be the main thing that you do. And so yeah, I think channels that you know and maybe love or maybe don't love are dying or fading.
They might be already deader than you think.
They might be. It depends on who you are, and some marketers are acting like they're already totally dead and then like missing out. Like, SEO isn't totally dead. Like, there's still a lot of search volume, but it's definitely fading.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with one particular channel that I think everybody can relate to and that I think has become extremely shitty. And then we move on to LinkedIn, which is also becoming a little bit shitty.
Yeah.
But the first one is so because we had something in the pre-talk and you talked about that you're interested in this entire space of like, like where influencer marketing is going. Also, I would assume also you mean like in the B2B space.
Oh, I definitely do. Yeah. I mainly think about B2B marketing, for the record.
So yeah, no, me too, right? Like I think mostly about B2B growth and so forth. And I also get sometimes people that mistakenly start to ask me questions that are more addressed to marketers and so forth. So for instance, hey Leah, like should we build a personal brand on YouTube, LinkedIn, whatever, like insert anything like to drive pipeline? And I am starting to say no. So let's fight about this a little bit. So I do think it is an interesting thing, and it's also an interesting topic. So like, what are we talking about here? Please interrupt me if I say something wrong.
Okay.
I think we're talking about the monetization of the access that influencers have to a very specific market. So for instance, I'm talking a lot about PLG. So if you have a software that you're selling that is kind of helping the same kind of audience that I have, then you would offer me a lot of money to peddle your shit, to peddle your stuff that is going to help to drive leads and so forth. This is marketing. So from looking at what happened at YouTube, a lot of different creators started to come up and then they could not earn enough money anymore from YouTube advertising. So they started to also get sponsored ads. This is why everybody after 10 seconds is starting to peddle NordVPN and so on things, right? So like marketing departments are busy, but it started to get to a point where it's becoming disturbing, not because of the amount of time that there are advertisings and so forth, but I do think that it's becoming objectively shitty because people are getting offered so much money for their reach that they have. They start to give shady advice. So it's not just about anymore like, here's a little product placement and so forth. So people are starting to get burned on these channels. I'm going to pause here for a second. Would you agree with this statement or not?
Definitely. I agree with you. I mean, that's not fun. It's not fun for me to agree with you. I agree with you, but I think there's still usefulness in working with influencers, but you have to like influencers. Maybe I have a broader definition of how I think about what an influencer is, or
Okay. So I'll give you a specific example, and I'm pretty sure we will have disagreement at some point. So that's good.
we're trying for disagreement right now.
We're trying for disagreement, exactly. So this is what this is about. I get a lot of emails from companies that are trying to offer me money just like to sponsor whatever. Like, so they're trying to do exactly the same thing, and that's totally fine. And for some of them, I actually say yes, but it's always about like, putting my message or like their message somewhere. They do not have control over the content and so forth. The only reason why I can do this while still pretending to myself that I'm true and all that, like, oh, I'm so real. I'm not selling myself out. The only reason why I can do this is because I make much more money with my brand that is about being honest, like in advising and growth advising and so forth. Once that goes to shit, it gets harder and harder and harder to say no to good marketing deals.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying, I'm not saying that I'm a...
Yes. If the only way you make money is through, say, sponsors or these deals, then yeah.
So you will, right?
Yeah.
You will change what you are doing because of the clicks, right? This is absolutely normal. Like everything gets big and then it becomes shitty. It's just like what it is also in these channels. So I do think that we have arrived now at a time specifically also LinkedIn and so forth. I don't know what your advice was, or like whether you do give advice also for brand building on LinkedIn and so forth to drive leads and pipeline generation. To go with forms like, as you said, the podcast, or like videos, or like deeply written stories, like with ungated content, like giving value first, PLG, that kind of stuff before you drive leads and so forth. What is happening now when AI is getting so good at copying the stuff in style, not in value, in style, that out of 10 posts that you're looking at on LinkedIn, 8 of them are objectively a waste of your time, but you cannot distinguish them anymore from the good stuff
Right.
because they look so damn fucking genuine all the time. So you click on it, you get burned.
Yeah. I mean, this happened even before AI, though, too, because you had a lot of like think boys. Can I say that?
You can say that. We leave that in.
Yeah. And women. You would think people, a lot of people who hadn't necessarily like had the experience to be talking about what they're talking about. And so, if you haven't done the work or been in house or, done the thing, it's really hard to speak from a place of credibility about the thing. And so even before AI was writing stuff, we had people writing this stuff with even less knowledge than AI, because at least AI is like synthesizing from a lot of places. So I think this has been going on for a while, but I get your point now that it's just like it's really hard to discern the bad from the good and people are taking bad advice. But I think that's all the more reason. I think that keeps you and I in a job. What does that mean for brands is a different story, because I think people want individuals they can trust and, say, well, if this person's putting it out, I trust it. But a lot of people, I think, it's also hard to know who those people are, right? Like who the people you can trust are and who they can't. So I don't know how to fight like misinformation and bad advice and all of those things. I'll leave that to some other expert in that area. But for me, I also make the bulk. I actually would say I make equal amounts of money from advising versus newsletter stuff, which includes paid subscriptions and sponsors and all of that. I try to keep personally a really high bar on what I will include. We actually ask for a recommendation from someone in the, MKT1 verse if we haven't used the agency or used the product before, or we go in and use it. And I write all the copy myself and it's a genuine recommendation. So I have to feel like I would actually recommend it, but most people are not doing that, I don't think.
Okay, so that's fair enough. And I think people like me and you who have an existing brand, like I'm just lobbing myself now into this pool of having a brand.
You have a brand?
I do?
Yeah.
Was that a question?
You said you're lobbing yourself in, so I wanted to validate you that yes, you have a brand.
If you do have an existing brand, then I agree with you, right? So like this is because word of mouth will prevail, because word of mouth is exactly the antidote to this particular shit that is right now happening. But my point is a little bit broader than this.
Yes.
If you ask yourself whether you should get started, so you've never done anything like do this particular thing on LinkedIn and so forth, I do say, do not even try it. While I do not know how the future looks like, I do think...
I see. And now I disagree with you.
So what is my point here? I am saying in this entire universe of client acquisition, right? Like new client, people that are not aware of your brand at all, it's going to get very, very bloody. And this is not about efficiency, like who puts out more content and so forth. I'm just saying that the noise will be so big that these traditional channels will be starting to get more and more and more and more and more friction, to the point that even if I do exactly the same thing that I've been doing for 2 years, will not work anymore.
Yes.
Even if you discount the additional shitty advisors to do exactly the same as me, even if I completely ignore this competition on top.
Yes. Well, I feel that way about everything, like where if you try to copy what someone did before, like you're not at the same place and time, you don't have the same set of inputs isn't the same, so the results are going to be different. So by the time you get like hip to a playbook, that sounds so not hip. By the time you get like up to speed on a playbook, the playbook is probably dead. But where I disagree here is I think I've defended influencers or people with brands like you and I a little bit, but I do think my advice to executives, founders, people at companies is if this is a natural thing for you that you would do to some degree already, then maybe do it and run with it and go a little deeper and have people help you like do more of it and build on it. But if it is not an innate thing to that executive or that founder, it's most certainly not going to work. And maybe it would have worked a year or two ago. So I think I know you said you're starting from nothing, but if you've posted here and there and you like to write and you like to do this, but you just haven't necessarily made time for it in your day, then I might say, oh, well, carve out time in your day to do it because I think it still can be worth it. But I think it's a very limited set of people that can make it work. Is that disagreeing or agreeing?
Nah, I'm not sure because the question, as usual with everything in life, it's how much, right? Like, how much is it going to be worth it? Like, how much of it works? Because, so first of all,
Okay.
two things. First thing is on LinkedIn, there's a direct incentive for people who are driving lead gen to claim that they have their shit together. There is a specific incentive for me to claim that my business is bigger than it actually is, because that also inspires trust and so forth, right? So, like, that's the first problem. I'm not saying that I'm inflating my numbers, but I'm saying, like, I would have an incentive just like everybody else and so forth. So some people will do it for sure. The second thing is for this new lead generation, it's always like, how much of your time per day do you invest for the output that you're getting? And now people say, like, yeah, but with AI, it's becoming easier. And I'm saying, that's true, but it's also getting easier for everyone else.
Yeah.
But even if you discount all of this, even with the competition, and I agree with you, it's like if you do have more competition, like an idea becomes less and so on. All of this is fine. So what I'm thinking is that you will not push through this noise to channels that are unaware of you and your solutions at all, because nobody will go to these, nobody, like now I'm in my LinkedIn speech, but like most people who are like unaware of like solutions for problems that they're aware of, they will not go to LinkedIn anymore. I had this conversation today with someone that said, like, hey, like I'm going to LinkedIn instead of Instagram because it feels like a little bit less shit use of my time, because you're learning something a little bit. And yeah, you could learn from AI, but will you find the correct solution for it? I don't know. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much here on just like how should you spend your time at, as any employee in the company and what's going to like make you break out. And like, I mean, the big problem, and like, no matter how many times people say this, people still do this, is everyone tries to do everything and tries to do, and like, I call that random acts of marketing, but you just end up trying to do so many things and you forget who you are as a company or as a person in the company or as a founder. It's like you got to think about what you're good at and you've got to lean into your strengths. And I think a lot of times people try to like make a strength that isn't like innately there. And I think that's my point. Like if you have like a gift for getting people to listen to you and having unique thoughts and having those resonate, like you're going to find a way to make it work, I think, despite all of the crap.
But I think what you're saying right now is like, as long as your product is good, it will find a way. And I'm saying it's not happening anymore. But no. It's like if we are the product, right? Like our voice. I don't think that neither you or me in 4 or 5 years could start again from zero without our brand that we have to our name.
Not in the same way.
Not in the same way. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So let's say we have some slight agreement in this regard. Let's say these classical channels become oversaturated, and I think they become anyways for many, many different levels. And AI is not going to save them. It's going to be their demise. So when we talk about SEO being dead or some other things that we're not talking about, yes, not every SEO consultant will go away. That's not what we're talking about, but their main attraction will go away. Do you have a general kind of framework or idea that you go to when someone is asking you, like, Emily, we do not trust in these traditional channels anymore. So, like, how can we figure out something else? Like, I don't know, for whatever. Like, let's say it's a startup, whatever. Like, how do we find a new channel and how do we evaluate it? How would you go about this? So you said focus is important.
Yeah, which is an easy thing to say. Yeah, I typically, and again, like this list of things is evolving, but I typically explain that there's a handful of large buckets. Like when people start talking about channels, they can get into like a list of like 100 things, but really it comes down to you have inbound and you have outbound, and what goes in those buckets and how you use those are obviously changing a little bit. You have what I call ecosystem, which is using third parties or other people or companies to grow, which is a huge bucket. And then you have virality or word of mouth of your product. And you have events, which is not mutually exclusive, but basically doing things. So if there's those buckets, then I say, before you can choose those buckets, I tell people they have to evaluate what their marketing advantages are. So this is back to the strengths thing. You have to figure out like what is unique about your company. And I have like a list of what those things can be, but that can be something like to the thing we were just talking about, like your founder has some like crazy, interesting story and industry experience that nobody else has. That's a obvious and maybe boring one. But it could be something like you're in a space where there traditionally have been tons of consultants, and rather than try to replace those consultants, you work with those consultants. That's like an ecosystem advantage. It could be that you're in a space where there's like a forcing function to get someone, there's like a compliance thing or like a timing thing that there's a forcing function that causes someone to have to buy. And then your marketing really needs to be all concentrated around that thing. And so I have people kind of look for, well, what is your secret sauce? And then I think the channels fall more in line rather than saying you should just go down this list of channels and run a bunch of tests. It's like you got to figure out your strengths and your advantages first and like lean into those and not just check the boxes that and go down the list. And in fact, you shouldn't try to do all of the things.
So, unfortunately, even though you are from the enemy, marketing, I do agree. Unfortunately, I have to agree with you. And so you went immediately after the differentiators, right? So, like, what makes you special in a market in a sense. So, okay, then let's follow from this one. First, how do you come up in B2B in today's markets with assumptions about your differentiators that marketing can use afterwards? Like, how would you go about this?
Like, how do I get people to figure out what their advantages and their strengths and their differentiators are?
That they at least come up with hypotheses and then we could talk about how to validate them through marketing as well, of course. But like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it comes down to having conversations and series of questions and like poking around. I mean, this is a very vague answer, but it's not like a formulaic thing as much as it's a conversation to say, okay, well, have you thought about, let's map the entire market and ecosystem and world you play in. Are there people that can help you in that world? Let's talk about how people are finding your competitor. And if you want to play in the same lane because you actually have something better to say, or if you need to play a whole different game because there's no way you're going to beat them at the same game. So it's just like having conversations using, again, like I have kind of a list of what these advantages can be and sort of asking these guiding conversations to figure it out. So it's not a magic formula for figuring this out. It's like smart conversations about strategy. So that's like a non-answer, but it's like when I have a conversation with marketers and founders about their company, usually within 20 to 30 minutes, if not 2 minutes, no, I'm just kidding. I can usually figure out, well, here's like a pocket or like a lane that you should be playing in because either nobody else is playing there or because you have this like unique situation in how your product is built or there's this unique moment in the ecosystem. But it's not a formula. It's definitely just like an intuition of understanding how lots of companies have grown in the past and also going back to first principles thinking and saying what's special and unique here. And I think people forget to like go back to, they jump straight into like the playbooks and forget to go back to the beginning and say, what are we doing that's different? One other thing to say here is like by the nature of how startups work and how venture works and all this stuff, most companies are going to fail, which is, again, not a unique thought. So it is definitely true that there are companies that just don't have this like magic lane they can play in because their product isn't good enough. They don't have like an interesting, unique take on how the market is changing and how they can, ride that wave of the market changing to win. Like it's not always that something exists. And that's just like the nature of the game. And if you don't like that game, like one, don't be a marketer because your whole job as a marketer is to figure out how you're differentiated and how you can win, I think. And two, like don't be in startups because that's how it works. It just sometimes you can't find the answer because there isn't an answer.
Yeah, unfortunately, startup, like in earlier stage startups is what you meant, right? Like, yeah. So if I had to summarize, and I have to say also here as a context that most of the companies that I talk to have definitely revenue traction. So I would say at least like 1 to 2 million, and then the majority 5 or more, right? So like we're talking not about just like seed starch, like.
But even still, most Series B companies are going to die.
No, with you,
Yeah.
100% with you. So I think from those that do fail, if I'm looking back right now, also a couple of years, then the majority of them was not dying because their market was too small. I think it was because they could not grab enough of the market that was too big that they addressed. And I want to maybe tie a bow around this and also get to exactly what you just said. So why is this relevant? This is relevant because the founders, if you would have asked them like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, they were always like, founders have this weird thing in that they want to chase this huge market because this is how they sell their story to the VCs.
Yep.
At the same time, the operational reality is exactly what you just said. And I want to use an example. I've never used it, so let's see how this goes.
That's what we're doing here.
So let's say you're a car manufacturer and you're going to ask like, hey, like Emily, I'm going to tell you what makes my cars special, right? Like I'll give you 10 attributes. And you hear all these attributes, like color, speed, whatever, like efficiency, whatever have you, right? Like power, blah, 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 all of this kind of stuff. And you have this conversation and you hook into one of those and you say like, hey, this one thing, what did you just say? You're the fastest car in the entire world. That sounds like a good thing, right? Like, that's usually not where the conversation becomes difficult because like everybody agrees, yeah, that's the one thing. Because if I then take this and I say like, okay, let's hook on this particular differentiator and let's see how you're executing on this inside of marketing and product, the reality is usually that they're not talking about having the fastest car in the world. What they talk about is fastest car in the world, best car in the world, most efficient car in the world. What they do is they drain the shit out of it. They do mention it, but if you do not leave stuff out of your messaging and out of the product creation, you're not targeted. And is that what you're, I think from the yes, from the aggressive yes, I think this is also what you meant. And I would say this is the biggest problem that I'm facing. It's not about making them talk about one thing. I want them to shut up about the other things.
People are afraid to double down on the thing. And maybe the thing's a product thing, or maybe the thing with this car manufacturer is like the way people are buying cars has changed. And now people don't want to go buy from a car dealer. And like, so you're the first, I guess you can buy lots of cars online, but whatever. Like maybe something with the buying behavior is changing. It doesn't need to be a feature differentiator for you to win. Like you can win with the same exact product as somebody else if you find a way to win on how you go to market or your customer service. Like there's lots of ways to win and product is one of them, I think. What was I saying? Why did I go down this rabbit hole? What's happening?
I could also give you another random thought while you try to capture yourself. Usually the way where you see this happen is in channels where companies have to make a decision. So for instance, the homepage, the very first page, you see how intent they are in outlining something, or whether they have to go back to this shitty messaging of like, we are the brand that can do everything for everyone.
Yep.
And that is usually where you see whether the company has this understanding of like, no, we're going to focus on this one thing for whatever it is. So in the example of the cars, it could be right now about more, we are the cars that are fighting climate change. I don't know, I'm not a marketer, but like, you know what I mean, right? Like it needs to be something about something specific. And if your brand message is only about your brand, like in general thing, and you're not doubling down on the differentiators, then yeah.
Here's the thing though. I think it is easier to see the problem you're talking about, which is the problem of trying to like say you're everything to everyone. It's easier to see that. Like you can go on a website and see, oh, they're trying to be everything to everyone versus, wow, they've really nailed it and they're focusing on it and they're giving just enough away. And you can dive deeper into the website or deeper into the marketing and figure out the other things that they do and if they check the boxes. I think it is harder to see, and this is where companies get messed up. It's harder to see if you're doing the same thing. So I use this analogy of like fuel and engine in marketing. You need to create fuel, content, messaging, and get it out to people, distribute it. That's the engine. I think it's somewhat easy to see when people fall into this trap on the fuel side. I think it's kind of harder to see when they fall into the trap on the engine side, where like maybe if you really dive under their hood, you can see they're doing lots of, really small tests on too many channels or not putting the right fuel on the right channels. But it's harder to see that like you are just scattershot and a mess on the engine side until you like go under the hood. It's like a little less obvious. Does that make sense? And I feel like that's where people make mistakes on both things, but people are more, I think, likely to say, I need to go back and revisit my positioning, or I need to redo my messaging, or I need to create content about different things than they are to say like, holy shit, like I've spread myself so thin on channels and different ways of doing things, or I am just like not focused enough here, or I haven't found our unique lane on the engine side. And so I think people are less likely to sort of realize that they need the same level of like focus and differentiation on the engine side too. Does that make sense?
Yes, you said something very cool here. And I think trying to bring one of my shitty metaphors into it again, I'm just not sure it's a metaphor, whatever. So I think why people trip up between doing this step of being founders that think they understand marketing as a smaller scale to a bigger scale is 10% growth at a small scale is worth nothing, right? Like nobody cares about it. It's not big enough, right? Like the ideas are not big enough and so forth. On a bigger scale, 10% is huge. So what you just said is at the same time, when you are growing, you have a lot of different ideas and you have capital to do different things. So like, for instance, we could change our messaging, marketing messaging. We could change the way that we produce product. We could change how we do programmatic ads. I don't know. We can fuck around with SEO. We can do all these kinds of things. So at the same time, 10% that are now huge are harder to prove and isolate from all the noise that is going on that you were doing at the same time. So therefore, my push is always for like, if you aim for big things that could have big impact,
Yes.
shut up about everything else so you can isolate to see whether it works or not. This is so stupid. If you're changing 4 things in your medication cocktail, whatever, you do not know anymore what actually helped you. And then you are cursed for eternity as a company to take all the medication.
Yep. Yeah, no, you said it better than I did. And one of the main questions I ask, I mean, I shouldn't say this. Eventually, I'm going to lose my job as an advisor because I'm just going to have said all the things that I say to people. But I say similar shit all the time. But one of the things I say is like, I'll look at plans and it doesn't matter what the plan is. I say, oh, great, there's a lot of stuff in this plan. What has the potential to move the needle for you this quarter, this half year, this year, whatever, this month? What is going to move the needle? And when you say that, some people are like, I don't, all of it together. And I'm like, that is never the answer. It's never all of it together. If that's the answer, you probably don't have something. Or if they're like, oh, it's this thing, I'm like, okay, you are making this report. Then why aren't you, slicing and dicing that in 7 ways and like deconstructing the report and then putting it back together again and doing all this stuff? And I don't know, like, why aren't you doing more on that if that's the big thing? And they're like, oh, because we have to do these other things too. And it's, do you? So it's really asking yourself, like, what is going to make a difference and like get rid of the other stuff. But people are afraid to do that.
It's interesting to me because one of the things that I've tried to reconcile is this theater that we play every year when we're planning what we're going to do in the next year. So we try to come up with plans. So, like, let's say, I don't know, we're working in the same company. You are CMO 1, I'm CMO 2, whatever.
Ooh, we're like dueling CMOs. That sounds like a real mess. I'm going to quit. I don't need this in my life.
So what I'm trying to get at is that we kind of have processes where everybody's trying to come up with the best idea based on the knowledge that they have, right? But this balancing between the ideas, because if you're betting on this one thing, it could actually fuck with the other thing. Not just differentiators, but also like if we're doing specific things on the messaging, then we probably should not change how we outreach to the customers at the same time, like by method, like, oh, we're going to discontinue Apollo. Now we're going to handle everything over, I don't know, just like whatever it is, right? So this goes a little bit to my point, but every idea by itself would be maybe quite good. And this is not only going to the point of like, how can you identify it? It's just also that if there's any case to be made for a group marketing manager or whatever you want to call it, or like any middle manager, like because people hate middle managers lately. That's kind of the thing, like Jensen Wong has like 60 direct reports.
Yeah, that means you're not managing anyone. When you have 60, you have 0.
Yeah, you're just on stage, like you're just managing this little. Anyways, I do think that the job of a leader there is like to really kind of balance and check what makes the most sense against each other and not just like, oh, okay, this is great. I'm just managing the people. I don't know. But like, do you also feel like that this is a thing that is going wrong in marketing? Like,
oh, definitely. I don't think people approach marketing enough like they would approach building a product. And I think it's actually very, very similar. And I think founders perpetuate this. So let me explain. I use this analogy a lot that founders or even marketers themselves think marketing is like sales and is like another, building a marketing team and building a sales team must be similar. It's completely different. Sales, you're like, sales is like a channel there. It's a very purpose-driven thing. They know what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to go out and close deals. It's like marketing is much more of like, you have this huge like canvas or landscape and there's so many different ways to do it and all of that. So marketing is actually more like product, and building a marketing team is more like building a product team. It's multidisciplinary. You're thinking about long-term, how you're going to make sure you're going to grow. You're thinking about short-term hitting numbers right now. Like it's the same thing. You're thinking about what are our long-term product and feature bets? What are the things we have to fix right now, to not lose revenue right now or lose customers right now? What do we have to do, to keep up with competitors versus what are we going to do to really make our product feel opinionated and stand out and win? And it's so much more similar to that. And hiring for marketing is more similar to that. And so when founders or marketing leaders try to just approach marketing as more formulaic, like building a sales team, it just all goes to shit. But if you use the analogy of like, okay, like what's your next big product? What's your next big feature? What are those, what are they, tent poles, whatever you want to call them? What are these big things? I think it makes more sense to people. And like, oh, you're not going to build 5 huge new features or products at the same time, if you're a growth stage company. So that analogy tends to help like right the ship if founders and marketing leaders want to listen to me, which sometimes they don't. And they just want to think of marketing as, sales, and you're here to drive pipeline today for sales, and it's a linear thing, and and it's not this like creative discipline. But if you approach it like building products, you're better off.
So let me see whether I can turn this around in some way. So I also try to advise around product management to think more on the terms of like, hey, you cannot build a good product if you do not understand the go-to-market side of it. It's just not possible. Like you cannot sell, like if you don't know how something is being held by the customer afterwards, like how they get to know about it, you don't know what you're doing in any ways. But anyway, so we both grew up in a classical world where people were thinking kind of like what you just said, like acquisition, that's marketing, and then retention, that's the product, and then customer success can deal with the shit that happens afterwards and so forth, and support, and sales is like selling somewhere in the cloud, of course. How do you think about marketing's role going forward when we talk about existing customers right now? So like when we're not talking about new customer acquisition, but like really like what is I don't know whether you have some kind of takes in this regard, maybe existing product marketing, like I don't know, like if new features are coming, they also need to be communicated, of course, to the customer base and so forth. This is a more like classical approach to this. But how do you think about this right now in terms of retention and expansion as well? Is account-based marketing the solution that we were looking for? Or like, where does this go for marketing? Or like, do you still think that marketing is more like, don't touch it as soon as it's in the product?
Oh, I
Kind of.
definitely don't think marketing's like don't touch it if it's in the product. I think that marketing is like a full life cycle thing, and marketing helps you communicate one to many and get your, message finessed throughout the entire journey. And so I think that lots of marketers, marketing teams are, and even great marketing leaders have been trained to think like stay in my little lane. And that's, you're limiting the potential of what marketing can do if you stay in your lane, because if you don't market to existing customers as well, you probably won't learn enough about existing customers. So actually like marketing to existing customers, and I'll explain what I mean, like actually helps you market to new customers as well. It's your same point about on the product side. So I think if marketing either by their own volition or because they're being told to is just staying in a little lane, like it's going to limit their ability to do anything well. So I think that marketing is going to differ from company to company, what exactly it looks like and how it works with other teams. And it's about like figuring out where marketing can move fast on their own and where they can collaborate. But I think on the existing customer side, again, I think of marketing as really helping with the one-to-many communications, really helping get the messaging right, really helping figuring out like what's the fuel you're creating to reach these people and what are the different engines we're using to get to them. And one of those engines could be things in the product, and one of those engines could be email, and one of those engines could be customer success. And so I guess in short, like I would call that life cycle marketing, or some people call it customer marketing, but that's confusing because customer marketing can also mean that you're like using your customers in marketing, like case studies and stuff. But I think it depends also on like the go-to-market motion and how you're involved there. But if you're sales led, much like marketing does sales enablement, marketing needs to do customer success enablement. They need to work with them on honing the messages, on honing the delivery of those things. If it's product led, they need to be working with product and collaborating on things they're doing on the growth side and the retention side. And so, yeah, is that a non-answer?
No. I'm with you. I'm just like, I'm looking so confused up into the sky because I'm remembering when I was in companies and I see these people pop up like called lifecycle managers and so forth. And they're usually not in a cross-functional team. They're kind of like, well, sometimes with marketing or whatever. But like whenever I see that, it's like kind of like what you just described on a more higher level. Like, they're in their silo and they don't care too much about what's going on. And I think one of the biggest learnings for me when I was starting to kind of lead more than just like 2 or 3, 4 or 5 teams was that my only tool that I have to kind of outside of like organizational structure, but my only team to kind of steer that chicken coop of whatever it is through intelligent incentives. So let me ask you a very specific, or goal setting, sorry. So let me ask you a very specific question. So the go-to kind of tooling that we always hear about marketing is MQLs. Now, MQLs do not work for any of what you just described, of course. When we talk about expansion, like helping out with feature awareness and all that kind of stuff with existing customers and so forth. Sorry to throw you into this cold water right now, but like I would be very interested in like, how do you think about good goals that are maybe a little bit unconventional sometimes? Like, so for instance, for me in product, I like measuring the time to value on specific stuff without going now too much overboard. So how fast does it happen? And for Mark, it should be probably about the conversion rates and so forth.
Like for me, marketing doesn't focus enough on conversion rate. I look at very sophisticated companies, even late stage companies. I look at their goals, I look at their KPIs, I look at their dashboards, and I'm like, where is conversion on this? Like they just have volume in every funnel stage, but there's no conversion. Yes, I can look at it and calculate the conversion, but where is the graph showing conversion over time from, and if they do have conversion, it's very it's like step by step, but they're not ever like saying, oh, well, I actually want to know conversion from, why can't I think of an example? Like they're looking at conversion from like MQL to SAL, but they're not looking from, or sales qualified lead, they're not looking at MQL to onboarded. Like they're never looking, because you can see different patterns in those things. So conversion is often just a huge afterthought, and looking at conversion throughout the whole journey, however you want to measure it, is a huge afterthought. And marketing, if done well, like is responsible for, like they kind of fully own, or with other people, but they're responsible for bringing in that top of funnel, or for driving pipeline, or for driving signups in PLG, or for driving engaged signups, whatever it is, adopted signups. But they should also be responsible for improving conversion rate everywhere. And that's a little harder to measure because it's like a group thing, but marketing should be responsible for making every conversion rate across everything you're measuring better. Because if you have tight messaging, if you're reaching people in the right ways, if you're creating brand affinity, if you're creating a brand people love and want to talk about, conversion everywhere goes up. And so I think it's harder to measure because lots of people touch it. But like, I think a marketing team is doing a great job if, they start doing a bunch of things to help with retention and conversion is going up.
I think this is such an interesting problem because the way that I'm thinking about growth, specific like growth teams, is as well like how can we efficiently like connect users or existing customers, for whatever you want to call it, with product value.
Yep.
So, and this is also usually about conversion numbers, right? Like ratios, like conversion ratios, right?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing there is that in some ways, the structure that I like to build these teams around is like a product team.
Yep.
So you have a PM, or marketing PMM, for whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, sure.
Designer, engineers, all of that needs to be in there because it cannot be that you just like optimizing the website messaging. That just doesn't work. I'm sorry. Yeah. And at the same time, they kind of operate a little bit also into this territory of marketing. And you know what it feels like to me? It's like we're still kind of fighting against this shitty concept that we have from the 80s, from the 90s, that we need to have a silo called marketing, silo called product, silo called sales, customer success, support, because it's easier to do the balance sheets, the cost calculation, because people love their fucking titles and so forth. And the bigger you go, the more it becomes about that. But with every person that I talk on my podcast, whether from marketing, customers, all of these functions, everybody says the same thing. You're good if you stop staying in your lane. And thinking about this specifically on MQLs, I'm not sure this is interesting for you, but like I was thinking about setting MQL goals that measure how many people do you bring me from my specific ICP that are being onboarded into the product in the way that you said, right? So like that reach the aha moment. And the reason for why this is so interesting is that marketing might say that, yeah, but like we cannot influence whether someone onboards or not, like inside of the product, we cannot influence. And it's like, that's fucking great. That's good because now you care. Right? Now you're going to show up on the planning meetings.
Exactly.
This is the thing that really pisses me off. Product teams do not go to marketing planning. Marketers do not go to product plannings. All they do is the bare minimum because there's some process somewhere, like because
or they're told not to go. I mean, sometimes marketing is like told not to go. And like maybe that's correct because they're thinking about the wrong things. I mean, people want to think about how a company functions as like easy and clean baton passes. And like you own this and you own this. And that's not how it works. And the more you think like that, the thing is also is like big companies kind of do have to operate like that. Like not everyone can, it's less flexible. And so one of your advantages as a smaller company against an incumbent is that you can not only differentiate on your product and how you go to market, but you can also differentiate on how you're structured. And so I think you'll see like some companies that are like really successful, they'll say things like, was it Linear that was like, we don't have PMs? Was that Linear? I don't know. There's like...
Sounds like something that Airbnb would say.
Yeah, or like people will say things like this, and then everyone's like, oh, I should copy that. And it's like, no, the point you should take away from this weird org structure or this weird thing they do is that like, as a startup, you can innovate on that stuff that works for you. So don't copy the same thing they did, but don't be afraid to use org structure as your differentiator as well. And so, yeah, the problem is people are like, oh, I'll do that weird idea too, and it will work for me. No, it's like, just do a weird idea that's specific to your company.
I mean, I think it's understandable as well. Like I always try to be understanding, even though it runs out on a daily basis for a lot of the advice that we have on LinkedIn, like not to sound smug in this regard, but I think I should actually write an article about this. Like I should call it like, don't run your startup like an enterprise, because I feel like what you just said as well is these enterprise inefficiencies come because of size. An efficient startup doesn't need to concern itself with so many shitty processes. And that alone is already a huge advantage over like this entire kind of friction that happens in enterprise, like corporate governance, like how do we apply for budget and all that kind of stuff. Of course, you need that at some point, but it's not going to, none of this has a purpose for a smaller company, because the only reason why these processes do exist in bigger companies like Apple, that's another circle jerk that everybody has, right? Like, oh, Steve Jobs said, and like, yeah, okay, try to run your startup like this. Good luck. Good luck finding the new iPod.
You're not Apple. You're not them. You're not the incumbent. It's not the same time. Like you're not, yeah, you're you.
Yeah. The only reason why these processes exist is because the alternative is something worse. And that means some things that work in a startup do not work at a big scale.
And vice
It's
versa.
just what it is, right?
Yeah, I think there's something interesting for me on this, which is I put out a lot of like templates and I read a lot about process and like how you run teams and how you run marketing teams. And then people are like, "Oh, that's like a lot of different things to do," or like, "I don't know how to follow that exactly." And it's weird because I'm putting out templates, but I don't want you to follow it exactly. I want you to take from it like, here are the things I should be thinking about it and adjust the process to work for you. So I guess that's just to say that even though I put out templates, I never mean for them to be super prescriptive. I mean for them to give you a general idea of how to do something and take it and run with it. Like people will use my templates and they'll show me if I'm advising them or something, and they'll be like, this looks a little different than your thing. And I'm like, that's great. That's helpful for me. Like do what you want with it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing with first principles, right? Like you cannot always apply them. And the answer is always it depends. But I do think that this is why it's important to understand the principles behind whatever you're consuming. It's also why I spend a lot of time also on my own guides on like explaining why I do believe that product-led growth works in the way that it does before I tell you how to structure your packaging.
Yeah.
Or like whether how much you should price your stuff and so forth, because you're going to adapt it anyways in the end.
Do you think that, I think a little bit that because of, LinkedIn and all of the content we have on places like that I think it's, we're trying to encourage people to think in more unique ways or to do different things. But I actually just think it's causing everyone or a lot of people to just scramble and try to copy a lot of people and like making less original thinking.
So this is an interesting point. I've come around on this a little bit, and I'm not sure this goes into the direction that you were expecting, but I was getting lately into a couple of books from quite successful people from the past, like CEOs from huge companies back in the days and so forth. And there's an interesting thing because there's this type of biography that really goes back to first principles in an almost oversimplified way. So for instance, like, I don't know what it was, like with Jeff Schwab or whatever his name was, that said that, well, like if you don't go to your people that operatively work in your business within 30 days, you have not spoken to someone that actually works the client's car, if whatever you want to call it that, you're going to lose your advantage no matter how big you are, right? And it was a multi-billion-dollar company and so forth. Constantly, like oversimplify kind of ideas like that. And I used to think that these are oversimplifications that are not useful to people. And to some degree, this is true as well. But I do think it matters who says it, and then understanding like why they came to this particular conclusion, so you can also see the kind of the pattern that emerges from this. So to answer your question, same advice from someone that you can also then inquire and understand like why they got to this. If you copy it, but you don't have the thing that comes behind it anymore, it goes from good advice to secondhand opinion, even though on the face of it, it is exactly the same thing. And yeah, I do think people get confused a lot, but this is now to my point, right? Like if you cannot differentiate anymore, like identify like who is the real deal and who.
I was trying to bring it back. That's what I was doing.
Yeah,
was
but like this is what it. I mean, look, how do you get booked on podcasts? Is it because people want my insights? No, they don't give a shit. First of all, they look, I mean, at some point, right? Like once they know my brand, but the first thing they want to know whether I am a good podcast guest is we go and see her CV. Was she there when Uber went public? All that kind of bullshit. So, but this is also a mechanism, right? Like we're trying to go by job titles. We try to go by experiences, like what happened with this, we overly focus on the successful people because we do not know who from the not successful people are the real people or not, right?
Right.
And that's kind of like this weird thing that happens. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think this is where it goes.
Sure. I don't know. We didn't really talk about the death of channels as much as I thought we were going to.
No, we didn't. All the channels are going to die, though, but we're going to talk about this next time. So you're gladly invited back. No, I think we did a little bit. And I think, this is where it's going to end. I have right now the feeling that my YouTube feed is going through a very interesting kind of metamorphosis, if you want to call it that. A lot of the stuff that I used to watch, I'm not watching anymore. And I actually returned to something that I never thought is going to come back, because I also worked in publishing houses, and that is paid journalists who are doing research, and they do not have any sponsoring message behind it, nothing. And it's interesting because I thought that this profession is actually dead because of influencers. But now that I'm on the other side, I actually see that there's a marketable use for this as well, because people do want to have genuine information. And if they get burned by a channel too much, they're not going to engage with it anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the independence of it. Yeah, I think it's something for, someone like me to think about too, or when you're choosing, which influencers to work with, it's like, where are they on this, just being owned or selling out? I'm really into music, and I go to a lot of concerts and always have, and I like smaller indie bands and all of that stuff. And I remember when I was younger being like, they totally sold out, and oh, they did this. And one of my favorite bands for over the last 20 years is this band called The National, and they did a bunch of stuff with Taylor Swift and produced her albums. And I can't stand Taylor Swift, hot take. And I'm like, oh, they're the worst. And then I'm like, but they got to make money. Now I'm like, I don't care. They got to make money. It's high time they make money. And so my own opinion about it in the world has changed too. But, these people got to make money, and journalists have to make money and all of that. But there's a fine line between using it to make an income so you can put out good stuff and just being a total complete sellout.
You know what's going to happen in the future? We're going to have platforms that not review businesses, but influencers.
Oh, shit. I got to get out of this game before then.
Oh, you should. It's too late for me.
I don't want to be reviewed.
This is an AI model of my shitty hot takes. Anyways, Emily, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming. How should people get in contact with you? Do you want to get them to contact you? Are you an AI model or not?
I'm a fake. It's newsletter.mkt1.co. I'm on LinkedIn as just Emily Kramer. You can find me there. Those are the two main places. And soon I'll have my podcast, Dear Marketers, wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, where you get your podcast from. Hopefully not from ChatGPT. First of all, do subscribe to Emily. She has a fantastic Substack, and she has the best templates ever. She's never been better ones. No, but actually, you have a really good Substack, and I highly encourage it. And that will be in the show notes. So thank you very much for this episode.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.